Hello and welcome to the channel. Here we share stories that touch the soul. Enjoy watching.
I never expected a kiss under a Christmas tree to change my life at 63. Honestly, I didn't expect a kiss under a Christmas tree at all. Not for me, not anymore, not since the days when love meant staying up past midnight talking about dreams and terrible movies. But there I was, in my red velvet cardigan that was slightly too big, smelling faintly of cinnamon and pine, trying to untangle last year's fairy lights, when it happened. His name is Jake. My new neighbor. Tall, annoyingly charming, with a grin that made me feel like a teenager again, if my teenage self had been slightly wiser and more sarcastic. He leaned over to untangle the lights from the top branches of my Christmas tree, and somehow, our hands brushed. And then, in one of those inexplicably cinematic moments, he slipped on the icy porch and landed, well, let's just say it wasn't on his feet. The impact was sudden, unplanned, and shockingly intimate. 1 second, he's apologizing, the next, he's pressed against me, and my mouth is suddenly in a precarious alliance with his. I should have pulled back. I should have coughed, gasped, or at least given a polite shove. But I didn't. There was a mischievous part of me, the one that had survived 3 divorces, 2 heartbreaks, and 1 particularly catastrophic salsa dancing incident, that decided, why not? Life is short. And, apparently, my life was about to get a very strange and festive twist. Jake blushed, which was unexpected, because usually men his age look more smug than embarrassed when a near catastrophe involves a kiss. I laughed instead of screaming, mostly because the absurdity of the situation was too delicious to resist. Well, I said, trying to sound nonchalant while my heart was doing a tap dance, that's one way to decorate a Christmas tree. He muttered something incoherent about slippery ice and bad timing, but I wasn't listening. My mind was replaying the kiss in slow motion, like a ridiculous romantic comedy I hadn't yet agreed to star in. And the worst, or best, part? I didn't want to stop it. Not entirely. Later, as I sipped hot cocoa with extra marshmallows, because one must have priorities, I realized the chaos of that moment had awakened something I didn't know I was missing. There had been so many quiet Christmases in this house, lights dimmed early, dinners eaten in silence, cards signed and mailed with dutiful politeness. But that one clumsy, accidental kiss had injected a kind of thrill I hadn't felt since I was young enough to believe that love was grand and reckless and sometimes ridiculous. And that's when I made my decision, I was going to let it unfold. I would not stop this unexpected narrative. I would watch it, participate in it, maybe even encourage it, because at my age, life was too short to linger on the sidelines or worry about propriety. I had seen enough caution ruin a perfectly good romance, or at least, a perfectly good flirtation. Meanwhile, I knew this story would be worth telling. Not just to my friends over tea, or to the occasional nosy neighbor, but to myself. It was going to be a Christmas unlike any other. A Christmas of unexpected kisses, awkward moments, and perhaps, just perhaps, new love that didn't care about the number of candles on your birthday cake. And so, with the lights twinkling and the smell of pine mingling with gingerbread from the oven, I waited. Not impatiently, because impatience was exhausting, but with a kind of mischievous, slightly scandalous anticipation. Jake, blissfully unaware, had no idea he had just entered a world where a simple Christmas tree kiss could start an entire season of chaos and delight. Because that's how life works, I realized. You never know which small, ridiculous, slightly embarrassing moment is going to rewrite everything. And under that twinkling Christmas tree, I decided, I was done pretending I was too old for surprises. I woke up the next morning feeling like I had somehow survived a mild earthquake, or maybe it was just my own heartbeat refusing to slow down after yesterday's slapstick romantic incident. The first thing I noticed, apart from the lingering scent of pine and cocoa in the air, was the glaring absence of Jake. He hadn't left a note, which, considering our kiss under the tree fiasco, I half expected. The other half of me secretly hoped he had fallen asleep in the living room wrapped in fairy lights, contemplating the cosmic absurdity of what had just happened. Breakfast was a quiet affair. I poured my cereal, a little too loudly for comfort, because even the clink of a spoon seemed like it might summon him into the room. My cat, Mr. Whiskers, looked at me as if to say, "You've finally lost it, haven't you?" I ignored him, though, because there were more pressing matters. Like the fact that my phone had exploded overnight with notifications, texts from neighbors I barely knew, friends I hadn't spoken to in years, and one from my niece, Clara, that simply read, "Mom said you've gone mad." "You didn't." I smiled. Clara always had a flair for dramatic understatement. She lived 3 states away but somehow always knew when chaos had entered my life. I debated texting back, but decided instead to brew a second cup of coffee and mentally prepare for the inevitable social repercussions of a 63-year-old woman being accidentally kissed under a Christmas tree by a man young enough to be my grandson, although, let's be honest, that thought was far too thrilling to entertain seriously. By noon, Jake had arrived, or, more accurately, I had accidentally orchestrated his arrival. I was outside, checking the mailbox for holiday cards, when he appeared over the fence like some kind of mischievous sprite, carrying a small box wrapped in tacky Christmas paper. He smiled awkwardly, hands shoved into the pockets of his coat, cheeks pink from the cold. Hi," he said, and for a moment, I considered telling him to keep it casual. But then I realized that casual had officially left the building. "Hi," I replied, setting down my mail with more dignity than I felt. "You left something at your..." I gestured vaguely toward the house he had moved into last month. Accident site yesterday?" He laughed, a nervous little sound that made me want to punch him in the arm, but in a friendly way. "Yeah. I brought cookies. As an apology. And maybe a little tribute to the Christmas tree?" I raised an eyebrow. "Tribute to the tree? You mean for almost decapitating me under it?" He shuffled the cookies from one hand to the other. "Partially. But mostly as an attempt to make amends. And maybe to confess that I might have enjoyed that incident more than is socially acceptable." I snorted. Socially acceptable, I thought, was a term I had abandoned decades ago. And yet here he was, holding a box of chocolate chip cookies like it might redeem him for a minor felony of romantic mischief. "Come in," I said, stepping aside, fully aware that my sweater was slightly askew and my hair had taken a form that defied gravity. "Let's see what you've got." The cookies were excellent, by the way. Soft, warm, and slightly too sweet, which suited him perfectly. We sat in the living room, the tree twinkling awkwardly between us like a silent, judgmental witness. Conversation started cautiously, like toddlers trying to figure out how not to cry at a birthday party. But soon, it found rhythm, awkward, flirty, and entirely unsuitable for anyone with sense. Jake told me about his life, the move for work, the breakup that still left him tentatively bruised, and his inexplicable fascination with old movie theaters, places where romance had a slower, more deliberate pace. I told him about my own life, which, when recounted in the sterile light of reality, sounded like a series of misadventures involving ex-husbands, cats, burned holiday dinners, and a collection of scarves that could rival a small department store. He laughed, genuinely and without restraint, and I felt a thrill that was entirely unreasonable for someone my age. By mid-afternoon, the air had changed. There was a tension, subtle but delicious, like the fizz in a freshly opened soda. We found ourselves sitting closer, knees almost brushing, and I caught myself imagining what it would be like if the tree, my perfectly harmless, slightly lopsided Christmas tree, were to collapse in slow motion, providing a convenient excuse for another, perfectly timed kiss. I shook my head, laughing at my own ridiculousness. "You know," I said, "if this were a movie, everyone would be rolling their eyes at us right now. But somehow, in real life, it's actually entertaining." Jake leaned back, hands behind his head, looking smug. "Entertaining? You mean scandalous, thrilling, maybe a little dangerous?" I raised an eyebrow, resisting the urge to roll my eyes. "Yes. Let's stick with that. Dangerous, thrilling, scandalous. And maybe, in some perverse way, educational." The afternoon stretched into evening. Snow began falling, gentle and lazy, coating the streets in white. Our conversation drifted from movies to music, from favorite holiday memories to ridiculous New Year's resolutions we had both abandoned years ago. Somewhere along the line, he brushed my hand, not deliberately, of course, but deliberately enough, and I caught my breath. Then came Clara's text. "Auntie, don't do anything too crazy with that boy." I laughed so hard I almost spilled my coffee. Too crazy, I muttered, thinking that this entire day had been exactly that. And maybe a little bit more. By the time Jake left, promising to return 4 more cookie research and tree safety inspections, I realized I hadn't felt this alive in decades. It was as if the world had tilted slightly on its axis, and for once, I was not holding back. I was leaning into the chaos, savoring every awkward, exciting, ridiculous second. I went to bed that night thinking about snow, Coco, and a man who had, through sheer accident and charm, reminded me that 63 was not too old for surprises. Not too old for kisses under Christmas trees. Not too old for anything, really. And somewhere deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning. The snow had just started falling, and so had something else, something warm, unpredictable, and entirely inconvenient. Love, it seemed, did not care about age, propriety, or past heartbreaks. Love just showed up. Sometimes with cookies, sometimes with slippery porches, and sometimes with an utterly ridiculous, unforgettable kiss under a Christmas tree. The next morning, I found myself awake before the sun, which is unusual for me. Usually, my mornings start with Mr. Whiskers loudly protesting the existence of his breakfast bowl and the world in general. But today, my mind refused to be quiet. It kept replaying Jake's grin, the accidental press of his body against mine, the way his hand had brushed mine without the world imploding, and somehow, I didn't want it to. I decided to venture outside, ostensibly to check the mailbox again. Really, it was an excuse to see if Jake had already embarked on his morning routine of suspiciously energetic jogging, which somehow seemed tailored to allow him to appear conveniently anywhere near my house. I half expected to find him tangled in the hedges or testing the durability of his neighborly charm. Instead, I found Mrs. Dalloway, my neighbor from 2 houses down, shoveling her driveway like a woman on a vendetta against snow. She spotted me immediately. "Well, if it isn't Miss Evergreen herself," she said, squinting against the morning sun. "And what's this I hear? A young man, a kiss, under your tree, no less?" I froze, mid-step. "Mrs. Dalloway, that's—" "Oh, don't play coy. Clara told me everything." "You can't hide a scandal from me, not when there are 2 feet of snow involved," she said, smirking. "I haven't been this entertained since the Johnson twins tried to sled down my porch last winter." I tried to maintain dignity, which, in retrospect, was hopeless. "It was an accident," I said. "A perfectly innocent accident." Mrs. Dalloway raised an eyebrow. "Accident? Huh. At 63? My dear, I think you're lying to yourself. And besides," she leaned closer, lowering her voice, "it's about time someone shook up this neighborhood. These streets are too quiet, too proper." By the time she left, my cheeks were hot, partly from embarrassment and partly from amusement. Life at 63 had suddenly become thrillingly unpredictable. I went back inside, flopped into the armchair, and stared at the twinkling lights on the tree. It wasn't long before Jake appeared, holding a thermos of something suspiciously cinnamon. He knocked lightly, and I waved him in. He gave me that grin again, the one that made me feel like a teenager who had somehow snuck into the principal's office without being caught. "I thought you might need coffee," he said. "Or tea. Or whatever the adults drink at, whatever hour this is." "Coffee," I said, and then added, with mock severity, "and make it strong. I have a scandal to survive today." Jake laughed and handed me the thermos. "Scandal? I only caused one accidental, life-altering kiss yesterday. Surely, that's not enough to warrant the term." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Because Mrs. Dalloway already thinks I'm starring in some kind of festive rom-com, and she's plotting to narrate the entire story to anyone who will listen. Including the postman. Possibly the mailman. And let's not forget Clara's text. Jake winced. Ah. Clara. She's spirited. Spirit is one word for it, I said. Judgmental is another. And meddlesome, unfortunately, is a close third. We spent the next hour in companionable conversation, talking about everything and nothing, holiday movies, the merits of peppermint bark, the tragic decline of good Christmas music in the age of streaming. Somewhere between discussing whether Home Alone was truly a cinematic masterpiece and debating the best way to wrap a strangely shaped gift without using excessive tape, Jake's hand found mine again. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let it rest there, warm and oddly comforting. Life had been quiet for so long, and now it felt alive. Electric, even. Like standing on the edge of something I wasn't entirely ready to name, but which I didn't want to ignore. Just as I was starting to entertain this dangerous level of optimism, the doorbell rang. I groaned, knowing exactly who it was before I even opened the door. It was Clara. "Hi, Auntie," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She gave Jake a polite nod and then turned her laser focus on me. "Are you insane?" "Insane is such a strong word," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "Let's go with adventurous." Clara did not look convinced. "Adventurous?" "Auntie, you're flirting with a much younger man." "Accidentally kissed him under the Christmas tree," I interrupted, and only slightly encouraged the situation. Clara's jaw dropped. "Slightly encouraged?" "Yes. Slightly. And it was festive," I added, giving her my most innocent, wholly unconvincing smile. Jake, to his credit, chuckled quietly, clearly enjoying the familial chaos he had walked into. "Hi, Clara. I promise I'm not plotting to steal your aunt away." "Though she might be plotting to steal me," he added with mock gravity. Clara's expression was priceless, a mixture of horror, disbelief, and a tiny spark of amusement. "Auntie, do you even hear yourself?" I did, and it made me laugh. Laughed until tears pricked my eyes, because absurdity was the only appropriate reaction. The three of us sat there, a little cramped, a little ridiculous, and somehow, perfectly content. By the time Clara left, warning me about potential heartbreaks, neighborhood gossip, and the dangers of cookie-fueled romance, Jake and I were alone again. The tree twinkled, the lights reflected in his eyes, and I realized something: chaos, it turned out, was a lot more fun than silence. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready for the next round of holiday adventures, slapstick mishaps, accidental kisses, and the delightful risk of falling in love again, under the most absurd and perfectly ridiculous circumstances. The week that followed was a whirlwind of tiny disasters and glorious absurdities. I began to notice a pattern: every time Jake came over, something ridiculous happened. Sometimes it was the dog next door deciding that he was an expert in doorbell etiquette and choosing that exact moment to howl. Other times, it was my own kitchen conspiring against us, pots clanging, timers buzzing, cookies mysteriously disappearing into what could only be described as a minor holiday black hole. One evening, he arrived with a bouquet of poinsettias, looking nervous in that boyish way that made my heart inexplicably flutter. "I thought we could decorate the porch lights together," he said, holding the plants like they were fragile artifacts from another world. "You know, teamwork." I raised an eyebrow. "Teamwork? Last time we attempted teamwork, you ended up kissing me under the tree." He grinned. "A minor complication. But consider it a creative approach to holiday decorating." I rolled my eyes, but secretly, the thought made me grin. Life had been quiet for so long, and suddenly, it was unpredictable, thrilling, and utterly ridiculous. As we wrestled with the lights, the poinsettias, and the unforgiving winds that seemed to delight in tangling wires, my mind wandered. Was it normal to feel this giddy at 63? At 63, I had learned many things: how to avoid burnouts, how to knit a scarf without drooling in frustration, and how to hide chocolate from Mr. Whiskers, but apparently, learning how to feel like a teenager again wasn't on the syllabus. Jake laughed, tugging a strand of lights free from a particularly stubborn branch. "You know, you're dangerously good at this." Dangerously good? I asked, eyebrow raised. Is that a compliment or a warning? Both, he said, with that sly grin that could have been trademarked. The lights finally went up, the poinsettias arranged without casualties, and I poured 2 glasses of spiced wine. We sat on the porch swing, watching the snow fall gently, creating a scene that looked straight out of a holiday card. And then, without warning, the moment shifted, subtle, imperceptible at first, like the shift in a game of chess when someone realizes they're about to checkmate. Jake turned to me. You know, he said softly, I never expected any of this. Any of what? I asked, pretending to sip my wine but secretly holding my breath. This. You. This, ridiculous, wonderful chaos. I laughed, because what else could one do? Well, I said, I'll have you know that I specialize in ridiculous, and sometimes, if I'm feeling generous, I sprinkle a little chaos on top for free. He reached out, brushing a strand of snow-dusted hair from my face. I think that's what makes it perfect. Just as my heart threatened to leap out of my chest, the porch light flickered. Then came the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. We froze. From across the street, Mr. Reynolds, the neighborhood busybody with binoculars and a notebook he referred to as his journal of civic pride, was capturing our every move. My cheeks burned. Jake laughed, whispering, he's probably been doing this since I moved in. I shook my head. Oh, perfect. We're officially a Christmas spectacle for the entire block. This is just what I needed. To be immortalized in someone else's slightly creepy scrapbook. Jake chuckled. Well, at least it's documented. If we survive, we'll have proof we didn't imagine this entire adventure. By the time he left that evening, promising to return with more holiday cooperation and, possibly, a strategy to outwit Mr. Reynolds, I felt both exhilarated and exhausted. Life, at 63, had suddenly become a thrilling game of accidental kisses, neighborhood espionage, and heart-stirring moments that I hadn't dared to imagine for years. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the wind tap against the windows, I realized something. Jake wasn't just a disruption, he was a challenge. A delightful, maddening, utterly charming challenge. And challenges, I decided, were far more fun than routine. The following days continued in a similar fashion. A runaway sled crashed into my mailbox while Jake was explaining the subtleties of holiday light placement. My cat decided that Jake's shoelaces were a threat to national security. And Clara, with all the subtlety of a foghorn, sent me texts that alternated between warnings, encouragements, and cryptic emojis that were clearly meant to instigate panic. Yet, amidst the chaos, a strange sort of intimacy grew between Jake and me. Not the clumsy, accidental kind from our first kiss under the tree, but something deeper. Moments of laughter, stolen glances, and even comfortable silences where words weren't necessary. I found myself looking forward to his visits in a way that felt scandalous, thrilling, and wonderfully dangerous. And so, as the days shortened and the snow thickened, I embraced the absurdity fully. The kisses, the mishaps, the judgmental neighbors, they were all part of the story now. My story. One that I intended to write with as much humor, heart, and perhaps mischief as I could muster. Because life, I realized, had a tendency to surprise you when you least expected it, and sometimes, those surprises came wrapped in poinsettias, tangled lights, and a smile that made your heart skip a beat. The morning after the snowstorm, the world outside looked like a sugar-coated postcard. Icicles hung precariously from the eaves, and every branch was heavy with freshly fallen snow. I stepped onto the porch, inhaling the crisp air, and immediately regretted not wearing proper winter boots. My toes went numb before I even reached the mailbox. Jake, as if reading my mind, appeared over the fence almost theatrically, holding a snow shovel like a sword. "Need a hand?" he called. "I need a miracle," I replied, gesturing at the snow that had accumulated overnight. "And maybe a cup of hot cocoa. Preferably both." He laughed and began helping me shovel the driveway, which quickly turned into a slapstick comedy scene. The wind gusted, snow flew into my face, and Jake tripped over his own boots more times than I could count. At one point, he crashed into the snowbank, sending me into a fit of laughter that made me nearly lose my balance. "You're enjoying this way too much," he said, brushing snow from his hair. "I'm enjoying watching you suffer," I replied, grinning. "Call it festive schadenfreude." By late afternoon, we had made some progress, though the driveway still looked like a battlefield. I was drying off inside when the doorbell rang. Expecting it to be a neighbor, I opened the door to find Clara, again. "Auntie! You will not believe what I just heard," she exclaimed, barging past me. Jake appeared behind me, looking confused but amused. Clara's eyes were wide with the kind of excitement only someone who has secretly been waiting for gossip could muster. "Mrs. Dalloway told half the block about you and, you know, him. The kiss. Everyone thinks you're starting a scandal." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Clara, please. The only scandal here is Mr. Whiskers eating the last piece of shortbread last night. That's a true crisis." Clara ignored me, flopping dramatically into the armchair. "Auntie! This is huge. Do you understand how this will look at the Christmas party?" Jake chuckled behind me. "Looks like we've officially become neighborhood celebrities," he whispered, leaning close. "I do not want to be a celebrity," I muttered, though a part of me secretly enjoyed it. That evening, while trying to escape Clara's relentless questions, Jake and I ended up in the kitchen, baking cookies as a form of tactical retreat. Flour dusted the counter, sugar spilled everywhere, and our hands kept brushing, sometimes accidentally, sometimes less so. "You know," Jake said, sprinkling sugar over the cookies in a way that looked suspiciously like he was trying to impress me, "I think Mrs. Dalloway might be exaggerating. Maybe just a little." "I think she might be immortal," I replied, rolling my eyes. "She's everywhere." As we laughed, the oven timer went off with a cheerful ding. We pulled the cookies out and set them to cool, only to find Mr. Whiskers had somehow managed to leap onto the counter and swipe a few before we could intervene. Jake shook his head, laughing. "That cat has more ambition than I've ever seen." "I think he's judging us," I said, wiping flour from my sweater. "Or maybe he's plotting." We laughed, and for a moment, the world felt perfect, snow outside, cookies cooling, and a man whose mere presence made my heart race in a way it hadn't in years. Just as we were settling into a comfortable silence, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Mr. Reynolds, binoculars in hand, holding a plate of cookies as if bribery could excuse his invasive curiosity. "I thought you might like some extra cookies," he said, peering suspiciously at Jake. "And perhaps a few details about yesterday's events." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Events?" "Yes, events," Mr. Reynolds said, wagging a finger like a judge in a courtroom drama. "The neighborhood is abuzz. You two have been observed, closely." "Very closely." I groaned. "Mr. Reynolds, please. We're just..." "Just what?" he interrupted. "Just enjoying a Christmas miracle? Just sharing an accidental, highly inappropriate kiss? Just giving the neighborhood enough material for a week's worth of speculation?" Jake and I exchanged glances. I laughed nervously. "All of the above, I suppose." By the time Mr. Reynolds left, I realized we were officially in deep. The neighborhood now regarded us as a scandalous, delightful anomaly, a 63-year-old woman and her charming, slightly younger neighbor, caught in a web of holiday chaos. Later that night, as Jake walked me to the door after a long evening of laughter, storytelling, and the occasional flower fight, he looked at me with a smile that made my chest tighten. "You know," he said softly, "I didn't expect any of this either. But I like it. All of it. Even the surveillance." I laughed, shaking my head. "Life has a funny way of giving you surprises, Jake. And sometimes, those surprises come with sugar, snow, and a meddling neighborhood." He leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from my face again. "Then let's see where this goes, shall we?" And with that, he left, leaving me standing in the softly falling snow, heart pounding, knowing that life had just gotten a whole lot more interesting, and considerably more chaotic. Because beneath the twinkle of Christmas lights, amidst cookies, snow, and neighborhood gossip, something remarkable was happening. Something utterly ridiculous. Something utterly perfect. The weekend arrived with all the subtlety of a marching band. The snow had thickened into a pristine white blanket that made everything look like a scene from a Christmas card. I was sipping my morning coffee, trying to decide whether to brave the cold or just accept that my mailbox might forever remain buried beneath a mound of snow. Jake appeared in his usual dramatic fashion, waving from across the street like a knight in slightly damp armor. "Good morning, Your Majesty of Misplaced Holiday Chaos," he called. I laughed. "Knight, are you planning to help me dig out the mailbox again, or is this purely ceremonial?" "Ceremonial, mostly. But I may assist if you promise cookies as tribute," he said, walking closer. His smile was infectious, and despite the cold, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with my coffee. We set about clearing the driveway, and I noticed something new. Mrs. Dalloway had stationed herself strategically at her window, binoculars trained like a hawk on our activity. I groaned, brushing snow off my gloves. "She's not even subtle about it anymore." Jake chuckled. "Considerate, neighborhood oversight. Official supervision." I rolled my eyes. Supervision, yes. Obsession, more like it. By late morning, the driveway was passable, though not exactly pristine. We were laughing over a snowball mishap when my phone buzzed. Clara, of course. "Auntie, stop encouraging him. You're going to cause a neighborhood scandal." I stared at the message and laughed aloud. Clara clearly hasn't grasped the art of living dangerously. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Living dangerously?" "Yes," I said, leaning on the shovel. "Accidental kisses, snowball fights, a relentless neighbor spying on us, definitely qualifies." Jake laughed, his eyes crinkling in that irresistible way. "Well, I suppose I can be your partner in crime, then." Later that afternoon, I decided to tackle a more domestic challenge, decorating the living room tree. Jake insisted on helping, and somehow, the two of us ended up in a tug-of-war over a particularly stubborn string of lights. One moment we were laughing, the next we were teetering dangerously close to a toppled lamp. "Careful!" I exclaimed, steadying the lamp just in time. "If that breaks, you're buying me a new one." Jake grinned. "If it breaks, I'll buy you the biggest Christmas tree in the county." And then, just as I was about to scold him for being ridiculous, he leaned close, brushing hair from my face again, that subtle spark of something intimate between us. I could feel my heart skip a beat. But before we could dwell on it, the doorbell rang. It was Clara again, of course, followed by Mrs. Dalloway, who had decided that apparently, our holiday exploits required first-hand observation. "We brought reinforcements," Clara announced, carrying a plate of cookies and an expression that clearly said, "This is going to get complicated." Mrs. Dalloway's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I thought we could join the festivities." "Considerate, community spirit." Jake looked momentarily stunned. "Community spirit?" he echoed, glancing at me. I shrugged. "Neighborhood entertainment," I said, trying to keep a straight face. The room quickly descended into a flurry of activity. Cookies were eaten, lights were rearranged multiple times, and my cat, Mr. Whiskers, declared war on the new arrivals. At one point, he leapt onto the table, sending ornaments rolling like tiny, fragile snowballs. Amid the chaos, Jake and I found ourselves in a quiet corner, barely able to hear each other over Clara's commentary and Mrs. Dalloway's critiques. And yet, in that brief silence, our hands found each other again. I could feel a tension, electric and unspoken, threading through the noise. "You know," Jake said softly, "this is more fun than I expected." "Fun?" "I call it organized chaos," I replied, smiling. "But yes, very fun." Just then, Clara, sensing the intimate moment, let out a deliberately loud squeal. "Auntie!" "I knew it. You're flirting." I groaned, while Jake laughed, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Flirting?" "We're just arranging lights," I said, though the warmth creeping up my cheeks betrayed me. By the time the guests left, the room looked like a holiday tornado had passed through, and yet, somehow, it felt alive. Jake lingered at the door, brushing a stray snowflake from my coat. "This, chaos," he said, "I kind of love it." "And you?" "I love you." My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, all the absurdity, all the gossip, all the slapstick snowball fights melted away. I realized that under the twinkling lights, amidst the mess and laughter, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. "Yes," I whispered, a mischievous smile forming. "I think I love you too." He grinned, leaning in for a kiss, not accidental, not clumsy, but deliberate. And as our lips met, I knew one thing for certain: this Christmas, the surprises weren't over. Not by a long shot. The week before Christmas turned our quiet little street into something resembling a holiday circus. Every day seemed to bring a new challenge, a new disaster, or an unexpected adventure, sometimes all three at once. Jake and I had become inseparable partners in crime, sharing laughter, stolen glances, and the occasional mishap that would have terrified anyone younger, or more sensible, than us. On Wednesday, it started with the decorations. I had insisted on the grandest display the neighborhood had ever seen: strings of lights crisscrossing the porch, garlands twining up the columns, and a collection of ornaments so eclectic it would have made even Mrs. Dalloway pause. Jake, ever the enthusiast, had taken it upon himself to organize the lights, which inevitably resulted in a minor tangle that ended with both of us on the porch, limbs flailing, and a rogue strand of lights wrapped around my neck. "Auntie, you're going to strangle yourself with the lights," he shouted, laughing as he untangled the mess. "And you're not helping," I yelled back, equally amused and exasperated. "This is your fault too, young man." By the time we were done, I was breathless, my cheeks flushed from exertion and laughter. Jake stood close, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You look amazing," he said softly. "Even when you're wrestling with lights." I felt my heart flutter, reminding me once again that 63 did not mean immune to mischief, romance, or a very inconvenient crush. Thursday brought the first real challenge: the family Christmas party. Clara had been texting nonstop, issuing warnings, advice, and cryptic threats about neighborhood gossip. "Mom's going to explode when she hears about Jake." "Be careful, Auntie," one message read. "Explode?" I muttered, setting down the ornaments. "I think she might actually be planning a controlled demolition." When Friday arrived, chaos hit full force. Guests began arriving early, slipping on icy walkways, juggling presents, and commenting on the elaborate decorations as if they were attending a royal gala rather than my humble home. Mrs. Dalloway arrived with her binoculars hidden in a large purse, claiming they were merely for artistic appreciation of the holiday ambience. I knew better. Jake appeared shortly after, carrying a tray of cookies that he had somehow managed to bake without burning down his own kitchen. He handed me one, our fingers brushing, sending a thrill through me that I refused to acknowledge aloud. The party quickly escalated. My cousin's teenage children ran through the living room, nearly colliding with Jake as he attempted to carry a tray of punch. Mr. Whiskers, perhaps deciding that he had endured enough, leapt onto the buffet table, sending cookies flying like tiny comets. And Clara, well, Clara took up her role as self-appointed crisis manager with gusto, whispering urgent commentary into my ear about the exact probability of social embarrassment based on neighborly observation. Amidst the chaos, Jake and I found a brief moment of calm near the fireplace. Our hands met again, fingers entwining almost instinctively. I could feel the heat from the fire, the warmth of his presence, and the ridiculous, exhilarating realization that this chaotic, imperfect, utterly alive moment, was exactly where I wanted to be. "You know," Jake said, voice low and teasing, "this might be the most fun Christmas ever. And not just because of the cookies, although those are excellent." I laughed, leaning against him. "Fun? Chaotic? Potentially catastrophic?" "Absolutely. But yes, it's wonderful." Our moment was interrupted by Clara's voice, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Auntie, are you flirting under the firelight again?" "Really?" I groaned, but Jake laughed, clearly enjoying the spectacle. flirting? I think we're just sharing warmth, I said, with the faintest blush creeping across my cheeks. As the evening wore on, the mishaps continued. The punch bowl tipped slightly, spilling liquid near the tree, a string of lights flickered ominously, threatening to short-circuit, and Mrs. Dalloway, notebook in hand, took meticulous notes on what she described as a study in festive audacity. Yet amidst all this, the heart of the night emerged. Laughter, music, the scent of cookies and pine, and that impossible warmth between Jake and me. It was a Christmas filled with absurdity, but also tenderness. Each accidental touch, each shared glance, each small disaster only drew us closer. By the time the guests had gone and the house was quiet, we were left alone with the twinkling lights, a few crumbs of cookies, and the knowledge that this Christmas had changed everything. Jake leaned in, brushing my hair behind my ear. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought I'd spend a Christmas like this. But I wouldn't change a thing." I smiled, feeling a thrill that was equal parts ridiculous and perfect. "Neither would I whispered. "Neither would I." And as we kissed, deliberate and unhurried this time, I knew that life, chaotic, messy, and wonderfully unpredictable, had finally given me exactly what I hadn't even realized I was waiting for, a second chance at joy, love, and a very, very unconventional Christmas. Christmas morning arrived in a flurry of snowflakes and light that made the world outside look impossibly bright and festive. I woke up to the faint scent of pine and a lingering warmth in my chest from the chaos and joy of the previous days. Jake had already left an assortment of little gifts by my bedside, a mug with a slightly smudged heart painted on it, a pair of cozy socks, and a handwritten note that simply read, "For my favorite troublemaker." I smiled, brushing a hand over the note, and felt a thrill that made 63 feel like the best age in the world. Mr. Whiskers purred loudly, clearly demanding his own share of attention and perhaps a cookie or two. Breakfast was a quiet, almost serene affair. Clara had gone off to visit friends, leaving me and the house in peace. Yet, the stillness was only temporary. Soon, there was a knock at the door, and there he was, Jake, carrying a small ladder, more strings of lights, and that infuriatingly charming grin that always made my heart skip a beat. "Ready to finish what we started?" he asked, his eyes twinkling like the lights in his hands. I laughed, grabbing my gloves. "Absolutely. But if anything explodes or collapses, I blame you entirely." We spent the morning decorating the front porch and the remaining parts of the house. Our hands brushed constantly, and every accidental touch seemed magnified in the crisp winter air. At one point, a particularly aggressive gust of wind knocked a strand of lights into Jake's face, causing him to stumble into me. We tumbled into a heap on the snowy porch, laughing so hard that we barely noticed the neighbors peeking through windows. "Are you two okay?" Mrs. Dalloway called from across the street, notebook in hand. "This is highly entertaining." I groaned but couldn't suppress a grin. "Yes, perfectly fine. Just practicing safe holiday chaos," I shouted back. By afternoon, the final touches were in place. The lights sparkled, the poinsettias stood proudly, and the snow outside fell like confetti. I had to admit, it looked spectacular. And there, standing beside me, was Jake, slightly windblown but radiating warmth, his hand finding mine again without hesitation. "You know," he said softly, "I never imagined Christmas could be like this." "Neither did I replied, squeezing his hand. "But somehow, it's perfect." We stood in companionable silence, watching the snow swirl around the lights. And then, just as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the world in gold and pink, Jake leaned close. His lips met mine in a kiss that was deliberate, tender, and entirely unhurried, nothing accidental about this one. I felt a thrill that made the years melt away, leaving only the two of us, the lights, and the magic of the moment. Just then, Mr. Whiskers leapt onto the porch railing, yowling indignantly, as if to remind us that even in perfection, chaos could never be completely tamed. We both laughed, holding each other, knowing that life was messy, unpredictable, and delightfully absurd. The evening brought a small gathering of neighbors, friends, and a few family members. Clara, finally at peace with the unfolding events, toasted to love, laughter, and the unexpected joys that life throws at you, even after 60. Mrs. Dalloway, true to form, meticulously recorded the entire scene, though she finally admitted that some stories were too charming to exaggerate. Jake and I stole brief moments together throughout the night, laughing at minor mishaps, sharing bites of cookies, and exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. Every accidental brush of hands, every playful tease, felt electric. The house was alive with warmth, laughter, and the peculiar thrill of a love discovered late, yet fiercely, in the midst of holiday chaos. As the night drew to a close, and the last of the guests departed, we stood on the porch once more. Snowflakes landed softly on our hair, and the lights twinkled like tiny stars. Jake pulled me close, his forehead resting against mine. "Merry Christmas," he whispered. "Merry Christmas," I replied, smiling up at him. And for the first time in decades, I felt completely unguarded, utterly alive, and ridiculously, delightfully happy. The world outside might have been cold, messy, and unpredictable, but inside, surrounded by laughter, light, and love, everything felt exactly as it should. And in that perfect, chaotic, utterly absurd moment, I knew something true: life, at any age, always has room for a little mischief, a little romance, and a very, very unexpected kiss under the Christmas tree.
Thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe and stay with us for more.